For me, this was probably the most personally confusing and controversial chapter of the book, um, because there's so much language of the difference between good and right. It was very, very interesting, um, very convicting. Um, there's just a lot to it that I'm excited to get into. I have a lot of notes, and I'm gonna try to go quickly through them. Um, if you didn't read the chapter, it's okay because I'm gonna kind of talk about a lot of the points that we sort of hit in it. But this whole idea of the genius of the good, um, it talks about a lot of different dilemmas in the intro that we face in our current day and age, everything from politics to social justice and a lot of different like stances and on ethics and things that we can take, where sometimes we can be standing for a good thing, but in the process we're actually discrediting or discounting another good thing, or what could be good in our eyes is not right or wrong in other people's eyes. We can be in support of a political point of view. In the same support, we're actually ignoring unethical behaviors of that politician, or removing the goalposts of the standards, because we're focusing on what's right versus what's good. And then again, it all got very confusing very fast. And it's just like, okay, what is good? What is right? Um, Going beyond culture and outside pressures from activist movements, it would seem we inevitably are making choices that categorize good things into different levels of good. And that was something that I kind of wrestled with a lot of like, I'm going to be in support of this good thing, or I'm going to give my money towards this good thing. But there's also other good things. There's other right things to be supporting. And so by giving to one, am I not giving to another? And am I justifying in my mind that this is more important than that? And to me, it could get very political very fast, and I'm going to try not to make it that. But I think it's important that we wrestle with these questions in regards to our purpose and our calling, as believers, to be humble and to be used of God, to be obedient, and to also follow the things that God has placed within us, that we ourselves are gifted in, that we're good at, and that God wants to use us in. Um, and that was really the shift in this chapter for me of understanding of like, I may not have a heart for a specific social justice thing or movement or idea that is potentially a good thing or a right thing, in the eyes of the church or in the eyes of the world, but God has given me a gifting and a passion for something else specifically. And it's good and it's okay to pursue those good things in our life, rather than feeling bad or letting outside voices tell us that we're not doing the right thing, we're just doing what we want. And I've gone through many seasons of my life where I've pursued things that I was passionate about, and that passion wasn't me um, being rebellious or me following my feelings. It truly was a passion that I felt God placed within my life to pursue. Whether it was for music and for video and creative, I had those seasons of my life where I was all about that, or I had seasons where I was traveling a lot and working with missions and missionaries, and very focused on telling the stories of missionaries and all these different things. And in my own way, I was doing good things in order to help others, but I was serving the purpose that I felt God had put on my life. And there were many times where it's like, well, talking with other people, we're like, well, that seems like such a niche thing, or that seems like it seems like you could be doing a whole lot more with your life if you did X, Y, and Z. Or if you would focus more on these things, you can make a greater impact. And that whole idea I really struggled in this chapter because that whole thought of what is the greatest impact actually like discouraged me. And I could remember back to moments in my life where I was in a state of paralysis because of that question of like, I feel called to do this thing, or I feel like God has placed this thing before me to step into, this good thing before me, but it's so small, or it seems so insignificant in comparison to all of these other things. Or there were seasons in my life where, I wasn't necessarily as focused on my devotional time because I was so busy doing all of these amazing things that God had laid before me. And I wasn't necessarily leaning into burnout, but I can remember sitting down with people and they would say, well, how's your prayer life? How's your, life in the word and all these things. And this like shame came over me because I wasn't doing what was right as a believer, but I was doing these good things, and I've felt like God was with me in it, and there wasn't that feeling of separation from Him. Um, and again, it's like it's a weird dichotomy of Jesus confronting the Pharisees. That whole story they talked about on the Sabbath day, where the disciples are picking wheat from the field and eating it, and then Jesus goes and he heals somebody with a crippled hand on the Sabbath, violating the law, doing what isn't right, but doing a good thing. It's an interesting thing to wrestle with, um, because I don't believe that we're called to be these religious drones where we have to have this like perfect schedule all the time of doing all these right things. And I think the beauty of this chapter, it moves into this place of it's out of our desire for God that we are moved to do good. And again, we talked about it even in Ephesians of that we were created for good works. And it's out of that good that we end up following what is right in the eyes of God. It's by doing the good that's before us and stepping into obedience for what he's laid before us that actually allows us to follow God's law and be obedient to him. Where on the reverse side, I have to follow the law and I have to follow all the rules, and I end up ignoring all of these potentially good things. I end up ignoring healing the sick and raising the dead and raising the dead dreams in other people's lives, or being used of him because I have to do these right things, or I have to do what's right in the eyes of others. And again, it's an interesting thing, and it can almost be seen as controversial, but the best way that I'm seeing it, or the best way that God has been revealing it to me in this season, especially in Ephesians, is if I'm so my heart within his heart, God's heart, and his within mine, if that's the place that I'm at, then everything is just this outflow and overflow of me just saying yes to him. And when the good things come about, God says, do it, and we get to do it. Um, but yeah, let me just hit on a couple of these things that I wrote in my notes. I kind of just went off there. I really feel like there's something deeper here for us. Um, but oftentimes we do what is right in our own eyes, or we follow the rules that benefit ourselves or make us feel superior and neglect doing the good. Um, and again, I think this is kind of pointing a lot to legalism and pointing a lot to, putting ourselves above others, kind of like what Rico and Melanie and I were talking about before this started, of we can do all the right things, and be good Christians, but really we're doing all this right stuff. And what is the motivation for it? Is it so that we can be seen by others in a certain light? Or are we masking some of the things within our own heart? Um, because again, I believe that if we focus on the heart, all of the symptoms of sin fade. When we get the heart right, all the other stuff, ceases to be an issue. And when we get our heart right, it allows us to live right and pursue the good that God puts before us. And again, I'm not trying to like this is what like jacked me up, because the language is so like good and right. Good and right. These both feel like the same word in a sense. But like so many times I feel like we will neglect doing good things. We'll neglect stopping when the Holy Spirit speaks to us to have a conversation with somebody, and we'll make up some kind of an excuse to justify and make it right in our mind. That might be the word that we need to hear. Of too often we won't step out because we're not sure if it's right, or if we're going to be right, or like, is this the right thing to do? Just in, like, again, hitting that word right. But I've found so often that if I sit around and I ask God for direction for every single little decision, I end up making no decisions because I'm sitting waiting, when God is making it very clear to me that the light is always green until he says it's red. That God wants us to continue to do the good and be Jesus in everything that we're doing and everything that we're saying, and allow him to let us know when we're not right, or when we're off. Um, Many times we justify being right over doing good. And that was actually one of the questions that I wanted us to wrestle with. Again, what the difference between right and good, but how often do you feel the need to be right? Whether it's in a conversation or in your actions, do we feel the need to be right? Is being right more important than maybe doing what's good? And I feel like too, for those that are married, or in a relationship, there's a lot to be said about um, choosing to lose when you think you can win, or when you can win, in order to do something good, or in order to allow something to heal, or allow a miracle to take place. There's been so many moments, especially like in arguments with my wife, Brittany, when it becomes a battle of who's right and who's wrong. um, we end up like escalating the argument very, very quickly. And it it's only until we both realize what we're doing, or when we realize like being right doesn't matter here. It matters if we can land somewhere good, if there can be healing, if there can be unity. um and I've even like had moments too where I've gotten into arguments over theological things that don't necessarily change my salvation or change my relationship with God, where we're arguing, all the different facts or scriptures or all the things. And sometimes it's good to argue those things out, because it makes you stronger in your faith and allows you to see other people's perspectives. But if you're so focused on being right, there's no humility there. If being right is more important than knowing the truth, or seeing the good, or being in unity, it's a recipe for disaster. But one of the questions, that question, how do you often feel the need to be right? Or are there moments that you can look to in your heart where you recognize like I'm more focused on being right, and maybe even think about those different moments, and how does that affect you? Like, how do you feel? Like, is it actually fulfillment in him, or is it something else? Let me jump back over here. Again, Jesus is the example of doing the good and being good. And for me, really confronted a lot of the hypocrisy in my own heart, um, where oftentimes I find myself putting a higher value on the right things that tend to benefit me, where I would say sometimes it's easier for me to isolate myself and get really focused in on my spiritual growth, my self growth, me, myself, and I. But just like we were talking about earlier, like that's not necessarily the good thing to be focused in on, because I'm just in an echo chamber hearing myself. But in the moment, I think it benefits me because I don't have to be in conflict with anybody else, or I don't have to rub up against differing personalities. Um, Again, we put that higher value on the right things that benefit us over the good things that God may have, that oftentimes will cause discomfort or an inconvenience. If we're not being tested, if we're not being inconvenienced or interrupted by God, then are we, for me anyways, I don't think I'm really in relationship with him. Or when I'm not hearing from God, or when I'm not seeing opportunities present themselves from the Lord, that's the sign for me to get on my knees and be like, God, what's going on? I know I have my rhythms and I have my patterns, that I'm following in my disciplines and all these things, but you have continued the more I'm in relationship with you, the more you interrupt me and the more you inconvenience all of my plans. And it's like this, that's the beauty of my relationship with him. And maybe that's the same for you. And the biggest thing too is we can't allow those rhythms and disciplines. We can't allow those rhythms and disciplines to turn into our religion in the sense of it becoming more important than doing the good and being the good that God has called us to be. If I'm unwilling to pause and do the good that God has placed before me, or it's the whole see a need, fill a need, then my rhythms and my disciplines become an idol. And we see that with the Pharisees. And it's like, again, it's such a tough thing to even read and grasp, because it's like, I know God values my time with him. I know God values my spiritual growth. And I'm not just saying, it's spiritual growth, but it was like the biggest thing for me of like, I feel like when the Pharisees first became Pharisees and rabbis, I want to believe that their hearts were in the right place. I want to believe that they chose to become rabbis because they truly loved God and they truly wanted to be in relationship with him. But then the more that they came into the system, the more that they had the rules that they had to follow. Again, they added over 600 laws to the 10 commandments that they had to follow in order to, be considered pure, in order to be considered, a follower of God, in order to be a rabbi. And so again, they're so focused on having to do all of the right things, that's when we see them shift into this place of superiority and having to be right rather than serving the people, rather than truly hearing from God. And the hope that I have, and I was talking to somebody this past Sunday about this, the greatest like hope that I have are the rabbis and the Pharisees that came to know Jesus and were willing to humble themselves, like Nicodemus in John 3, where he came and met with Jesus in secret. And I think about Paul, who was radically transformed by God. The Pharisee of all Pharisees, is able to become a radical follower of Jesus. And that's like and that's why I can read this, and there's like hope for the Pharisee in me. Like there's hope for the times where I've gotten too focused on the religious patterns and not necessarily focused on the kingdom work that God has called me to every single day. And like, so I say this, and like getting to the end of this chapter is like there's hope for me. And Jesus's desire is to just arrest our hearts and go, hey, this isn't to shame you. Hey, this isn't to, make you feel bad for following these different things or trying to level up and have these disciplines. But there's so much more than just following the rules and following the law. There's a freedom that I have for you if you'll just be the good and do the good that I've placed before you. And again, it's such a hard thing, I think, for me, just because I've been a believer and I've been in different churches and circles and all these things. And there's this feeling of this is what's right. And this is how church is supposed to be, or this is how my Christian walk is supposed to be. And we serve a God who's creative, and we serve a God who wants to reach the lost and wants to bring people, draw them near to him. And many times he uses his children to reach those that are lost. But if I'm so fixated on what's right, I'm neglecting his plan for the world. And again, I'm all about embracing love and suffering. As I die to self, the more I follow and obey Jesus, the more I die and feel less pain and suffering. And it's a beautiful thing. But there are moments in our lives where there's this flowing freedom to love others, heal the sick, talk with desperate people, cast out demons, raise the dead, hopes and dreams in people's lives. But if we're so fixated on ourselves or doing what we think is right, we could miss out on those opportunities. If I'm too focused on my own journey, I'll miss out on being used by God to help others in their journey. This is actually a quote from the book, that legalism kills the genuine life of faith and strips us from seeing the sacred moments and opportunities around us. I highlighted one of the questions in the book that I wanted us to look at. And this is kind of fun. Just to ask yourself the question, what are you good at? And which of those things that you're good at would allow you to do the most good in the world? And whatever the answer is to those questions, that's something you need to step into. And again, I think we can, like I said earlier, we can paralyze ourselves when we try to measure impact and keep ourselves from stepping out in faith and doing certain things because we go, oh, I don't have as much money as Elon Musk, or I don't have as much talent as you know this person, or I'm not as smart as that person, or whatever. And we can compare, or we can say, we can't make as great of an impact as some of these other people. But if we can just say, God, what have you placed inside of me? What have you placed before me? Help me to do it to the best of my ability. Or would you increase the gifting upon my life if I step into this? I think many of us have gifts, talents, and even spiritual giftings that, like a muscle, if they're not used, they just atrophy. And then I wrote down here, Instead of this is from in the book actually. Instead of asking, what's the least amount of good I need to do to still be right, we should ask, what is the most good that I could do with my life? Look for the good and know that it is always right to do it. And then I highlighted here, the encouraging thing is that you don't need to be good at everything. You create good everywhere that you go. I Just to kind of wrap it up, I feel like I've said this a few times already, so forgive me, but I'm having an existential moment, I guess, in thinking about this. Of all the times in my life where I talked myself out of doing good because I didn't think that it was great enough, that I felt like I could, I would do it if I could make a greater impact, or I would do this, if God did XYZ, or I fleece it out and refuse to step into it rather than seeing that the light is green and going. And I wrestle with and I go to God with all of the times where I have had indecision or chosen not to step out in faith, and I ask for forgiveness. And I don't sit and play the what if game, but I do have to bring it to the Lord and say, God, I'm sorry I didn't step out in this area, because God could have used that to do something even greater than I ever could imagine. I mean, we talked about this last week. He is the God of the exceeding abundance. And I think so often we don't realize that the good that we could do, as small as it may be, in the hands of God, he takes our natural and he makes it supernatural. And it's so funny. Again, I was talking to Nate this last week about some really cool stuff that's happening. Sorry, I'm put you on blast real quick, Nate. Of like,
Oh, you're good.
I just I love the when we can be willing to be available to God, and our yes is yes. It is crazy the amount of opportunities and connections that will just start to stir up, because God is looking for people that are willing. God is looking for people's yeses, and he's not it's not that he's not looking for us to do right, but again, I think sometimes we seek to do right in our own eyes or in the eyes of others, whether it be in culture or friends or family or whatever. And again, a lot of the time it's pride, or we talk ourselves out of doing the good because it seems so insignificant. But could it be that God has placed you exactly where you are to make the greatest impact in other people's lives? And I believe it's true that we, each and every one of us, are positioned where he needs us to be. And he's just waiting for us to see that good in front of us and begin to step out into it. Um, but yeah, this chapter's really convicted me. It's really challenged me, and it's sort of a not a punch in the face, but maybe a mirror being held up in front of me, where I see the Pharisee in me, and where I see the times where I've gotten a little religious instead of choosing to do the good and pursue him, and in pursuing him, allowing the overflow to just get all over everyone around me, in what I'm doing. And so that's really my hope this week, and even as a church, what we're stepping into right now, and especially in this Ephesians series, has the ability to radically change our church. Because what would it look like to be a part of a church where everybody was active in the giftings that God gave them? Like, what there's a leader that I follow who I love, and I'm good friends with his son. Runs a huge church, and one of his dreams is to close his church, put a sign on the door that says, "We're closed. We're not here. We are all out changing the world." And I know we need the church. I know that we need to equip the saints, and we're going to be talking about that. And that's really the purpose of the church, is to equip the saints. But it's equipping the saints to do the work of the Lord. And that's my hope, and that's my desire for every single one of us, to do the good and do the good works that He's planned for us since the foundation of the earth. So that's all I got. I love you guys.